My children sued me the year after my husband died, claimed I manipulated him, that I stole what should have been theirs. But here's the part no one seems to understand. If they hadn't come for me with lawyers, everything I built would have been theirs eventually. Every brick, every title, every damn dollar. But they got greedy, and worse, they got stupid. I'm Lorraine Parker, 62, and every cent I have, I earned with my own 2 hands. I didn't marry into money, I built it. I flipped houses before it was trendy, negotiated with developers twice my size, and learned early that a woman in real estate has to be twice as sharp and 3 times as patient to get half the respect. I turned my first commission into a condo, that condo into a duplex, that duplex into a portfolio. My husband, Charles Parker, was a high school literature teacher. Gentle, steady. The kind of man who kept the same leather wallet for 20 years and still opened my car door in the rain. When we married, I was already deep in the grind. He never resented it. In fact, he said he admired how I could see the future in things falling apart. Charles came into our marriage with 3 kids, Kenneth, Alicia, and Marcus. Their mother had died from cancer just 2 years before we met. I didn't replace her. I respected her place. But I raised those kids. I showed up to every science fair, every detention pickup, every damn stomach bug and scraped knee. I never pushed for mom. That came on their terms, slowly, over time, and I carried it with pride. But now, as I stood in my dining room holding the thick legal envelope a courier had just delivered, that title meant nothing. Petition to contest will, Kenneth Parker, Alicia Parker, and Marcus Parker v. Lorraine Parker. They claimed I coerced Charles into signing everything over to me, that I manipulated a dying man into rewriting his will, that the properties, the rentals, the company, they were joint marital assets and should be divided equally. What a joke. Charles never invested in my business. Not because he didn't care, he just wasn't interested. He had his books, his students, his quiet evenings. He once said, "The empire is yours, Lorraine. I'm just here to cheer you on." And yet now, his children, the ones I raised, loved, and never left behind, were coming for the one thing I had built on my own. I placed the documents on the table beside Charles's photo. He was smiling in it, wearing that tired suit he refused to throw away. His flannel shirt still hung over the back of his chair, like he might come home for supper any moment. I was going to leave it to them, I whispered. Every damn bit of it. And I meant it. I never planned on taking any of it with me. I had my will drafted years ago, divided equally among the 3 of them. Why wouldn't I? They were my children. Not by blood, maybe, but by every sacrifice, every late night, every decision I made with them in mind. But this lawsuit changed everything. They didn't just question my intentions, they erased our history. All those years of birthday cakes, bailouts, tuition checks, hugs in hospital waiting rooms, they tossed them away like trash. And for what? Because they couldn't stand the thought that what I built, Lorraine, wasn't something they had a right to. I looked around the house. Every floorboard, every patch of paint, every window had a memory. I remembered carrying drywall up those stairs when Alicia was still in braces. I remembered fixing the broken porch light the week Marcus graduated. I remembered Charles standing in the kitchen, holding a bottle of champagne the night I closed on my 10th property. If they hadn't sued me, they would have had all of it one day. I would have handed it over with love. I would have stood in court for them if someone else had tried to take it away. But now they'd have to take it from me piece by piece, in front of a judge. They'd have to sit in that courtroom and look me in the eye while they tried to dismantle what they didn't help build. And I'd be there calm, prepared, and furious, not just because they betrayed me, but because they were too foolish to see that I was already on their side. They had everything, I said to Charles's photo, and they threw it away with a lawsuit. I picked up the envelope again, placed it in my office drawer, and shut it with a soft click. Let them come. Because the only thing more dangerous than a woman they underestimate is the woman they should have trusted. 2 days after the letter arrived, Kenneth showed up unannounced. I was in the backyard pruning the lavender bushes, Charles's pride and joy, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I looked up, and there he was, stepping out of his shiny black BMW like he had just stepped off a magazine shoot. Kenneth had always been the polished one. Hair slicked back, shirt neatly tucked in, watch gleaming even in the Georgia Sunday. His smile was cold, calculated, and it disappeared the moment our eyes met. "Mom," he said, like the words still belonged to me. I stood up slowly, wiped my hands on my gardening apron, and gave him a nod. "Didn't expect to see you." "Oh, I thought we should talk," he replied, glancing around like the bushes might be wired. Face to face. I led him to the back patio where the rocking chairs sat, same ones Charles and I used to drink iced tea in every Sunday afternoon. Kenneth didn't sit. He paced. He cut to the chase. "You know why we filed." "I read it," I said evenly. "All 5 pages." He folded his arms, the Rolex on his wrist catching the light. "This doesn't have to get ugly. We can settle privately. If you're willing to compromise." "Compromise?" I repeated. "You mean give up what I built?" He blinked, just once. Dad was part of that life too. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Kenneth, your father was a teacher. He supported me, but he never asked for a stake in my business. He knew better. He also changed his will. Yes, because he trusted me." Kenneth stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Look, we know you've worked hard. I'm not saying you didn't, but you're not getting any younger. What are you going to do with all those properties anyway? You're alone now." I stiffened. There it was, the dagger wrapped in silk. "You think because I'm a widow, I'll fold?" I said quietly. "You think being alone makes me easy to break?" "I think you should think long term," he said. "I already did," I replied. "I had my will drafted 3 years ago. You were in it. All of you were. Not anymore." That stopped him. His lips parted, but no sound came out. I rose from my chair, brushing dirt from my gloves. "Let me tell you something, Kenneth. If you, Alicia, and Marcus had come to me like people like family, I would have handed everything over one day. I had no intention of taking it with me. But you chose lawyers instead of conversation. You're overreacting." "No, darling. I'm reacting just right." He opened his mouth again, but I raised my hand. "You made your move. Now I'll make mine." "Oh." He left 5 minutes later without shaking my hand. As his car disappeared down the road, I stood there for a while, the wind whispering through the lavender. Charles would have been furious. Not because of the lawsuit, but because of the disrespect. He believed in loyalty, in gratitude, in showing up for the people who show up for you. If you feel connected to Lorraine's pain, give her a like. And don't forget to comment where you're watching from. You might find someone nearby watching this same story too. I went inside, took off my gloves, and called my lawyer. His name was Walter Green, a soft-spoken man in his late 60s with white hair and a spine made of steel. He'd been my legal counsel for 15 years, helped me close my first big commercial property and knew every clause, every deed, every signature in my portfolio. "Lorraine," he said as soon as he picked up, "I've been expecting your call. I need to go to court," I said. "No settlements, no apologies." There was a pause on the line. Then softly, "Understood." We spent the next hour reviewing documents. Walter confirmed what I already knew. The properties were mine. Acquired with my income, registered under my LLC, separate from marital assets. Charles had no legal claim, and thus, neither did the children. The will was just the icing on the cake. The foundation was ironclad. "But they'll argue emotion," Walter warned. "They'll paint you as the outsider, the second wife, the woman who stepped in and stepped over." "Let them," I said. "I'll bring receipts." That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of sweet tea and spread out the deeds in front of me like a general preparing for war. Each paper told a story. The rundown duplex I bought with a loan and a dream. The fixer-upper on Bay Street I renovated while Alicia was still in college. The little beach house Charles and I painted together one summer when the air was thick and the laughter easy. They weren't just properties, they were my life. And now my children were trying to tear that life apart because they didn't want to wait, because greed got the better of them, because they forgot who stood in their corner all these years. I pulled out a photo album and flipped through it slowly. There was Alicia in her prom dress bought with the bonus from my first big flip. Kenneth holding the keys to his first car, partly paid for with a commission check I earned after pulling 3 all-nighters staging a historical home. Marcus asleep on my lap during a thunderstorm, fingers curled around mine like I was the only anchor he had. They had my heart. They still did, somewhere. But I wouldn't let them take my backbone. The next morning, I woke up early and went to the courthouse. Not to file anything yet, just to sit. To breathe in the place where truth would have to stand tall. I watched a few hearings, saw the rhythm of justice play out in real time, and I made myself a promise. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one, but it would be on my terms. My way. My court. The courtroom smelled like old paper and lemon polish. Quiet, still, like a church waiting for sinners to confess. I sat near the back that morning, unnoticed, watching the slow machinery of justice creak and crawl. Judges, clerks, lawyers, families, people in suits and sneakers alike, all standing in the same place hoping the system would remember who they were. My hearing hadn't even been scheduled yet, but I needed to be there. To see it. To feel the ground where this battle would play out. I took notes, not just legal ones, but human ones. How the attorneys moved, how the judges listened. Which arguments made people flinch, which made them lean in. The courthouse was a stage, and I'd be damned if I walked into mine unprepared. Walter called that afternoon. They filed a motion, he said, trying to freeze your assets. I laughed not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Let them try, I replied. They'll need more than paper and privilege. They're arguing that Charles contributed emotionally to your business success, he added. That without his stability you couldn't have built what you did. That's rich, I muttered. Next they'll say the kids deserve stock in Apple because their dad owned an iPhone. But I wasn't shocked. I was disappointed. I had expected anger, even hurt. But this shameless attempt to rewrite my life, to turn love into liability, was something else. After I hung up, I went to my study and pulled out a drawer I hadn't opened in over a year. Inside were the files, dozens of them labeled with dates, addresses, permits, loans, the backbone of my empire. I ran my fingers along the manila folders, and it was like touching history, my history. Then, I found the letter. It was tucked inside a thin folder marked Bay Street Renovation. A single page, folded once, handwritten in blue ink. Lorraine, if anything ever happens to me, I want you to remember something. None of this was mine. The houses, the deals, the wealth you built, it all. I was proud just to witness it. I hope the kids know what you gave them. And if they forget, remind them who you are. With love, always C. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't seen the letter since he passed. I'd forgotten it even existed. But there it was, Charles's handwriting, his voice on the page clear as day. I read it 3 times, then carefully placed it in a plastic protector. That letter wouldn't be framed. It would be filed with the court. 2 days later, Alicia came to the house. I didn't recognize her at first. She looked tired, too thin. The elegance she always clung to seemed forced now, like it was weighing her down. I opened the door without smiling. Alicia. Mom, she said, voice low. I'm surprised to see you. She held her purse tight like a lifeline. Can I come in? I stepped aside, motioned toward the kitchen. She walked slowly, like the floor might break beneath her. We sat at the same table where I used to braid her hair before church. I didn't want to file the lawsuit, she said, eyes not meeting mine. It was Kenneth. He said we needed to protect ourselves. Protect yourselves from what? Me? My voice was calm, but each word landed heavy. We didn't know what to believe. The will. It was just so final. It was Charles's will, I said, not mine, and I didn't touch a word of it. She looked at the window, out at the backyard where the swing still hung from the old pecan tree. I thought you loved us. I felt something sharp twist in my gut. I did. I do. But love doesn't mean I have to hand over what I bled for. She blinked fast. I know. Her voice broke. I didn't want to lose you too. I wanted to believe her. Maybe some part of her meant it. But apologies don't erase court filings, and tears don't unsign affidavits. I reached across the table, laid my hand on hers. You didn't lose me, Alicia, but you don't get to take from me what I built with bare hands and bruised knuckles. She nodded slowly, then stood. Will you fight us? I looked her in the eyes. I already am. That night, I slept for the first time in days. No dreams, no guilt, just rest. Because when you've been underestimated your whole life, Standing up for yourself doesn't feel like a war, it feels like coming home. The next morning, Walter called. They've requested a mediation hearing before the trial, he said. They're scared. Let them be, I replied. They should have been scared of losing me, not my money. I hung up and stared out the window. The courtroom was coming, and I would be ready with facts, with fire, and with every damn receipt they didn't think I kept. The mediation room was smaller than I expected. Beige walls, cold air, and a round table that tried too hard to feel neutral. The kind of room that pretends to calm you down but only makes the tension more obvious. Kenneth sat across from me in a tailored navy suit, his tie perfect, his jaw tight. Alicia sat beside him, hands folded, eyes red from either tears or guilt, I couldn't tell which. Marcus was on the end, tapping his foot under the table like he wanted to be anywhere else. Their lawyer, a tall, sharp man named Victor Lang, stood beside them, his briefcase stacked with papers that probably had more venom than truth. My lawyer, Walter Green, sat quietly next to me, his gray suit pressed, but his expression relaxed. He had the calm of a man who'd seen people destroy themselves before. "Let's begin," the mediator said, her voice light but firm. "This meeting is a chance for both parties to find common ground before trial." I almost laughed. Common ground. The phrase sounded ridiculous now. The ground between us had been scorched long before today. Kenneth spoke first. "Of course he did. Mom Lorraine," he began, correcting himself halfway. "We didn't want to do this, but you've left us no choice. Dad's estate should be divided fairly." Walter leaned toward me and whispered, "Let him talk." So I did. Kenneth talked about family legacy and joint effort. He said Charles had contributed to my success by creating stability. He said my properties had flourished within the marriage, and therefore, by moral and legal principle, they belonged partly to the children. When he finished, I took a slow breath. "Are you done?" He blinked. "For now." "Good." I opened my leather folder and spread out a stack of papers, contracts, purchase agreements, and property deeds, each one neatly labeled, dated before or during the early years of our marriage. These are every acquisition I've made since 1991. Each bought with my money, under my LLC, funded by loans I signed for personally. Every title is in my name. Every renovation was managed by me. Your father didn't contribute a cent. Do you want to see the checks? Victor, their lawyer, shifted in his seat. "Mrs. Parker, even if those properties were initially purchased under your name, marital assets—" "Stop right there," I said, voice low but sharp. "You can quote the law all day, but you can't rewrite it. Georgia Statute 1939. Separate property remains separate unless commingled or gifted. None of it was. I can prove that with records that go back 30 years, so tell me, what's your next argument?" The mediator cleared her throat softly. "Let's try to stay civil." "I am being civil," I said, still looking at Kenneth. "I'm sitting here, listening to my own children accuse me of theft. That's as civil as it gets." Alicia finally spoke. "We're not accusing you of theft. We thought you'd want us to have security." I turned to her. "Security?" I repeated. "You all grew up in it. I paid for your schools, your cars, your weddings. I gave you a home when you needed it, and I planned to give you everything when I was gone. But you couldn't wait, could you?" Her chin trembled. "It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." For a moment, no one spoke. The air felt heavy enough to touch. Marcus leaned back in his chair, avoiding my eyes. Then Kenneth broke the silence. "You're making this harder than it has to be." "No, Kenneth," I said quietly. "You are." Walter slid a single sheet across the table. "Before we go further," he said, "Mrs. Parker would like to enter this into record for mediation." The mediator took it, reading quickly. "A letter from Charles Parker?" "Yes," Walter said, "written in his own hand, dated a year before his passing. It clearly states that all business assets belong to Lorraine Parker exclusively as her separate property." The color drained from Kenneth's face. Alicia's hands flew to her mouth. Marcus muttered something under his breath I couldn't hear. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth was louder than pride. "I found that letter 2 days ago," I said softly. "In his files. I wasn't going to use it. I thought maybe we could handle this as a family. But then your lawyers accused me of manipulation, so now it's part of the record." Kenneth tried to recover, but the fight had gone out of him. Even if the assets are yours legally, morally. Morally? I interrupted. Morally, I took in 3 grieving children and made them my own. Morally, I worked myself sick to give you comfort. Morally, I never once threw your mother's name in your faces. You want to talk morality, Kenneth? Let's start with gratitude. He didn't respond. None of them did. The mediator looked between us, her professional calm starting to crack. Perhaps we should take a break. Walter nodded. That's probably wise. I stood first, gathered my documents, and walked out of the room without another word. I needed air. Outside the courthouse, the sunlight hit me like forgiveness. I leaned against a pillar, breathing in the humid Georgia air. People bustled by strangers, ordinary and free of my troubles. For a moment, I envied them. Walter joined me a few minutes later. You did well, he said. Better than most would have. I wasn't trying to perform, I said. I was just telling the truth. That's usually the best performance of all, he said, smiling faintly. I looked at the street. A couple walked by hand in hand, laughing. Across the road, a teenager was selling lemonade for $1. Ordinary life moving on. I wondered when mine would start again. They won't back down, Walter said. Kenneth's pride won't let him. I know. I straightened my shoulders. Then I won't either. He smiled again, a tired smile. You're a tough woman, Lorraine. No, I said. I'm just done being the easy one. That night, when I got home, I lit the candle by Charles's photo again. I set the letter beside it, the one with his blue ink fading slightly from age. You always believed in me, I whispered. Now I'll have to believe in myself. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. It would rain by morning. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the sky darken. Somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't just about property or pride anymore. This was about respect, and I wasn't leaving that table without it. The first time I saw the change in Kenneth's eyes was at Charles's funeral. It was subtle, barely a flicker, but I recognized it immediately. The way he glanced at me as I stood by the casket, the way his lips tightened as I accepted condolences from people who called me his rock, his angel, his true partner. That day, Kenneth stopped seeing me as the woman who raised him and started seeing me as the woman who now stood between him and what he thought was his. The memory of that moment came rushing back as I sat in my living room late that night, flipping through the thick leather-bound photo album Charles and I had kept for years. I hadn't opened it since the funeral. The edges were worn, corners slightly frayed, and the pages smelled faintly of lavender and age. I turned each page slowly, pausing at snapshots of Christmas mornings, family barbecues, Alicia's baby shower. There was one of Marcus, 6 years old, with chocolate ice cream smeared across his cheek, his small hand wrapped tightly around mine. Another of Kenneth, in his high school graduation gown, with Charles and me on either side of him. I remembered that day clearly. I had stayed up all night altering the gown myself because the one the school provided was too short. Then I saw it, the photo from the funeral. I had forgotten someone had taken it. It was black and white, printed on glossy paper. I stood near the front of the church, one hand clutching the edge of the wooden pew, the other holding Charles's wedding band. My face was drawn, eyes swollen, but my spine was straight. The children were behind me, huddled together, each looking somewhere else. Not at me. Never at me. I stared at the photo for a long time. That was the day they decided they didn't owe me anything. It didn't matter that I'd kept the lights on, or that I'd missed 3 business deals to stay by Charles's hospital bed. It didn't matter that I had loved them for 3 decades. In their eyes, I was no longer the woman who held the family together. I was the gatekeeper to a fortune they suddenly believed was theirs by birthright. That same night, I received a message from Marcus. Not a phone call. A message. Hey, Mom, can we talk? Alone? I don't want to do this anymore. I stared at it for a long while. My heart clenched at the word, Mom. I responded with a simple, tomorrow, 10 a.m. My place. At 10:04 the next morning, he arrived. His jeans were wrinkled, and his shirt hung off his shoulders like it belonged to someone else. Marcus was always the sensitive one, the artist, the observer. He rarely spoke unless he had something to say. That morning, his eyes were red, and his hands wouldn't stop moving. We sat on the porch. I poured 2 glasses of lemonade, the same way I always had for him when he was little. "I didn't want this," he said quietly. "I didn't even know Kenneth had filed until the papers were already submitted." "But you signed," I replied gently. "I know." He looked down at his lap. "He told me it was just a formality, that it wouldn't hurt you, that you'd settle and we'd avoid a public fight." "And you believed him?" He didn't answer, just looked out at the garden, where Charles's favorite rosebush had just begun to bloom again. "Marcus," I said, my voice trembling just slightly, "I don't care about the money. Not really, but I care about the lie. The betrayal. I gave you everything I had, my time, my effort, my love, and the moment your father died, all of that got erased." "I didn't erase it," he said, eyes shining, "but I didn't stop it either, and that's on me. I reached for his hand, the way I had when he was small and afraid of thunder. "I'm not here to beg you for loyalty," I said. "I don't want your guilt, but you need to decide right now what side of this you want to be on, because this isn't just about money, it's about memory, about respect, and about whether you see me as family or a line in your inheritance." He nodded slowly, gripping my fingers. "I want to fix it, if you'll let me." I didn't answer right away, just squeezed his hand gently. The next day, Walter called me again. "They've changed strategy," he said. "Kenneth's lawyer just requested a financial audit of your company's books. They're trying to find anything that they can use to prove commingling of assets." I let out a long breath. "Let them dig. They'll find what I want them to find." "And what's that?" "Proof," I said, "that I was always honest, even when no one else was." After the call, I walked back into my office. I opened the filing cabinet and pulled out 3 binders, one for each child. I had started them years ago, planning to give them as part of my estate plan. Each binder held records of every loan I had paid for, every tuition bill I had covered, every car I had co-signed, every act of quiet, invisible love that I never asked to be thanked for. Now, they would become part of my defense. If they wanted to turn my motherhood into a courtroom argument, I'd bring the facts. Love wasn't always soft. Sometimes it was spreadsheets and notarized documents. Sometimes it was refusing to let people rewrite your worth. I placed Marcus's binder back on the shelf, one step closer to redemption. Kenneth's, though, stayed on the desk, because he still hadn't called. 3 weeks after Marcus came to my porch with tears in his eyes and truth on his tongue, Kenneth filed an emergency injunction against my company. He was done pretending. Gone were the polished words of fair division and mutual understanding. His legal team now accused me of intentional fraud, concealment of marital assets, and my personal favorite, manipulative alienation of familial inheritance. In simpler terms, he was calling me a thief, a con artist, a woman who seduced his father, hijacked his legacy, and locked him out of what was rightfully his. Walter slid the court notice across my dining room table, like a man offering a loaded gun. "This is war now," he said. "He's bringing out everything." I read it in silence. My name was on the top line, bold, followed by a paragraph that made my chest tighten. Temporary restraining order requested to halt the sale or transfer of properties under the entity Parker Estate Holdings, LLC. "He wants to freeze my business," I said. "He wants me powerless." Walter nodded. "He's betting you'll panic, that you'll settle to save face, but Lorraine don't." "I won't," I said, "but I'll make him regret betting against me." That night, I went to the garage. It wasn't where I usually kept business records, but it was where I kept Charles's old banker boxes files from the early years, before the LLC, before the brand. I found a dusty bin marked 1993, Lorraine Personal. Inside were receipts, notebooks, and photos from my first 5 properties. And in the very back, I found the invoice that changed everything. It was dated the 12th of April, 1993. A contract for the purchase of a foreclosed house on Jones Street, my first solo flip. I'd bought it at auction with a $15,000 cashier's check I borrowed against my $401k. Charles and I had been married for exactly 3 weeks. His name wasn't anywhere on it. I had signed every line myself. I held the document like it was a relic, because to me, it was. It was proof that this journey had always been mine, start to finish. I hadn't stolen anything, I'd built something. And Kenneth was about to learn what happened when you tried to bulldoze a woman's foundation. The hearing for the injunction was scheduled for Thursday. By then, the whispers had started. I heard them at the market, at church, even at the hair salon, where I overheard someone say, "Isn't that the woman whose kids are suing her?" And worse, what did she do to make them that angry? That's what no one tells you when people hear a mother is being sued by her children. They don't assume the children are greedy. They assume the mother failed. Failed to love, failed to protect, failed to raise them right. They never stopped to ask if the children failed her. On the morning of the hearing, I wore a navy dress, simple, strong, the same one I wore to Charles's retirement party. I stood in front of the mirror and practiced my face. Not angry, not emotional. Just steady, unshakable. Walter picked me up at 8:30. His car smelled faintly of old leather and lavender, a scent I hadn't expected but welcomed. It reminded me of the sachets I used to put in Charles's drawers. "Ready?" he asked. "I've been ready for 30 years, I said. The courtroom was more crowded than usual. The Parker name carried weight in our town, not because of me but because of Charles. People still remembered the teacher who stayed late to tutor, who ran the debate team like it was the NFL, who never forgot a student's birthday. And now, his widow and his children were at war in front of the same community he once unified. Kenneth stood at the opposite table, flanked by Victor Lang and a new junior associate who looked barely older than Marcus had when I first met him. He didn't look at me, not once. The judge, Honorable Martha Bledsoe, was a woman in her 70s with short gray hair and a reputation for zero tolerance. She adjusted her glasses and looked at Kenneth first. "Mr. Parker, you're requesting a temporary injunction against your stepmother's business. On what grounds?" Victor stood. "Your Honor, the Parker estate was mishandled after Mr. Charles Parker's passing. My client believes the business in question was falsely registered as separate property. We request the court preserve the assets until a full forensic audit can be completed." Bledsoe turned to me. "Mrs. Parker?" Walter stood and handed the clerk a folder. "Your Honor, we have submitted documentation proving Mrs. Parker's business predated her marriage. Every property listed in the suit was purchased independently, with her income. We've included financials, title records, and personal statements from associates who worked with her in the early years. Additionally," he paused and smiled faintly, "we submit a notarized letter from Mr. Charles Parker affirming that the business was never a marital asset." The courtroom shifted. Kenneth's jaw tightened. The judge scanned the papers, her eyes flicking from line to line with practiced speed. After 10 minutes of silence, she closed the folder. "Request for injunction denied," she said flatly. "There is insufficient evidence to freeze assets that, by all submitted records, were independently acquired." Kenneth looked stunned. Alicia, sitting behind him, looked down at her hands. Marcus, seated in the row behind me, let out a breath he had been holding. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just breathed. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with microphones. I walked past them without a word. Let them write what they wanted. The people who mattered, the ones who knew what it took to build something from nothing, would understand the silence better than any quote. Back home, I poured myself a glass of iced tea and stood by the window, watching the late afternoon sun stretch across the porch. One battle down. But the war was just beginning. The following week, I received a notice from the bank that nearly stopped my heart. The trust Charles had set up for the grandchildren was under review by court order. It wasn't even mine. I never touched that account. Charles had opened it long before his diagnosis, managed it quietly, contributed to it religiously. Every Christmas, he deposited a small gift amount in each grandchild's name. He called it their start fund. Not a college fund, not a rainy day cushion, just a gesture. Something that said, "I believe in your beginning." Now Kenneth had dragged that fund into his war against me. I sat at the kitchen table, letter trembling in my hands, the words swimming before my eyes. "Why?" I whispered to no one. Why would he do this? Why would he risk something so sacred, something untouched and pure, just to make me look worse? Walter came by that afternoon. He didn't wait for coffee or pleasantries, just dropped his briefcase on the table and opened it like we were back in the courtroom. "This isn't legal strategy anymore," he said. "This is personal. He's not after assets now, he's after reputation. He's destroying Charles's legacy in the process," I said. That account was for the kids, the little ones. What kind of man uses his own children as leverage? Walter sighed. The kind who believes perception wins over truth. Unfreunded. I looked out the window, jaw clenched. Then we'll change the perception. That night, I went through Charles's journals. He'd been an obsessive note-taker, scribbling in margins, underlining passages in books, filling yellow pads with thoughts that ranged from lesson plans to half-written poems. I hadn't been able to touch them since he died. But now, I needed to. And that's where I found it. In a spiral notebook labeled Legacy, dated the spring before he passed, Charles had written a series of entries about the trust. One entry read, April 14. The kids will never understand how hard Lorraine worked to carry this family. This trust isn't because they deserve it, it's because she carried enough burden for them already. I want them to start lighter, freer. She earned that for them. If they ever forget it, I hope this paper reminds them. I photocopied the page and sent it to Walter first thing the next morning. I want that entered into evidence, I said. He read it twice. It'll hold, he nodded, especially coming from him. That afternoon I called Alicia. She didn't answer, but 5 minutes later she called back. I heard about the trust, she said quietly. That wasn't my idea. But you didn't stop it either, I replied. I didn't know he was going that far, she said. He told us we needed to keep pressure on you, that we were just protecting the future. I laughed, but it wasn't out of humor. He's burning down your future for spite. He's risking your children's inheritance to hurt a woman who tucked you in every night. She was quiet. I found Charles's notes, I said. He wrote that I earned that trust for them, that it was his gift, yes, but that it was rooted in what we built together. You still think I'm the villain here? Her voice cracked. I don't know what to think anymore. You better figure it out before there's nothing left of the Parker name but a legal battle and a pile of shredded goodwill. She didn't answer, just hung up. The next morning, the bank reversed the hold on the trust. Walter had presented the journal entry, the original setup documentation, and Charles's notarized intention. It was enough to convince the financial institution that the fund wasn't part of the estate under dispute. Another fire put out, but the smell of smoke lingered. 3 days later, Marcus came by again. He brought coffee and silence, as usual. We sat on the porch swing, watching the breeze stir the tall grass in the backyard. It was almost peaceful. Do you think he hates you? Marcus asked suddenly. No, I said. I think he hates the idea of me. What do you mean? I think Kenneth built a story in his head. A version of the world where everything that didn't go his way was someone else's fault. I was a convenient villain. Someone to blame for why Charles left him out of certain business conversations, why he wasn't given more responsibilities, why he never felt quite seen. Marcus looked down at his cup. He used to say you were too controlling. Maybe I was, I admitted. But when you run a business, and a household, and a marriage, you don't always have time to explain every decision. I tried to lead. Maybe I should have listened more. But you did what you thought was best. I did, I said. And now I have to live with the consequences of what that looked like to the people I loved. He didn't reply, just rocked the swing back and forth with his foot. You're not him, I said gently. Don't let his bitterness become your silence. He nodded slowly. Are you ready to testify? I asked. He looked up at me, eyes full of fear and love. If it comes to that, yes. Good, I said, because it will. The trial date had been set. 4 weeks from today. The room had no windows, no clock, just a long table, 4 chairs, and a recorder in the center that blinked like it was alive, waiting to catch every word, every breath. The kind of room designed to drain you mentally, emotionally before the first question was even asked. I'd been in boardrooms tougher than this, negotiated 6-figure deals with men twice my size and half my respect. But today, the challenge wasn't business. It was blood. And blood always ran colder when it felt betrayed. I sat across from Kenneth. His lawyer, Victor Lang, sat beside him, shuffling papers like they were weapons. Alicia wasn't there. Marcus was waiting outside, scheduled for after me. Walter sat to my left, calm as ever. He wore the same blue tie he wore the day we won the injunction hearing, as if to remind me we'd survived worse. A court reporter was already typing, fingers dancing across her keyboard. Victor leaned forward. Mrs. Parker, let's begin. I adjusted my posture. Straight spine, hands folded. My mother always said if you sit like a liar, people will believe you are one. State your name and occupation. Lorraine Ann Parker, real estate investor, retired CEO of Parker Estate Holdings. And you were married to Charles Edward Parker? Yes. For how long? 31 years. And during that time, did you acquire any properties jointly with Mr. Parker? No. You're sure? I'm sure. Oh. He glanced down at his notes, pretending to be surprised. So, you're saying every single one of the 36 properties currently under your LLC was purchased and maintained solely by you? Yes. Even the ones he lived in? I smiled faintly. Charles lived in homes I bought. That doesn't mean he bought them. He also drove a car I leased. That doesn't make him the bank. Walter cleared his throat. Let's keep this focused on facts. Victor ignored him. Did Charles contribute in any non-financial way to your business? Yes, I said honestly. He supported me emotionally. He encouraged me. He made me coffee during long nights when I reviewed contracts. But he didn't sign loans. He didn't negotiate with clients. He didn't write a check. Victor's tone sharpened. So you're saying he provided emotional labor but no actual investment. I'm saying he was a partner in life, not in real estate. Kenneth shifted in his seat, arms crossed. I looked at him, directly this time. You're trying to strip me of everything I built, but I never denied what your father gave me. Love, peace, support. But you can't put those on a balance sheet, Kenneth. You can't sue me for hugs. He didn't respond. Victor continued. Were you aware that your name is the sole beneficiary on Charles Parker's final will? Yes. Do you know why your name was added to his bank account 6 months before his passing? Yes. He was sick. We needed easier access to manage medical bills. And you don't find that timing suspicious? No, I said. I find it responsible. Victor pressed his lips into a line. He wasn't getting what he wanted. And what about the life insurance policy? I took a breath. Charles named me the sole beneficiary of a $250,000 policy. He said he didn't want me to have to sell any properties just to cover end-of-life expenses. That was his decision, not mine. Victor leaned back, dissatisfied. No further questions. Walter stood. Mrs. Parker, did you ever manipulate, coerce, or otherwise influence your husband into changing his estate plans? Never. Did you ever ask him to exclude his children from his will? No. Did you ever intend to disinherit Kenneth, Alicia, or Marcus? I turned to Kenneth again. No. I had every intention of splitting everything equally when I passed. If they hadn't filed this lawsuit, they would have received everything. But they sued me before I had a chance to give it to them. Walter looked at the recorder. Let that be on the record. The court reporter nodded. Victor looked uneasy. The deposition ended soon after, and I stepped into the hallway, shoulders tight, breath shallow. Marcus stood against the wall, holding a bottle of water like it was a shield. How was it? He asked. I didn't lie, I said. That's all that matters. He nodded. It's my turn. I looked him in the eye. Tell the truth. All of it. Even the parts that hurt. He hesitated. What if it makes Kenneth look bad? I put a hand on his shoulder. Then that's his burden to carry. He walked in, and I sat down on the bench. I could still hear Kenneth's voice in my ears, tight, defensive, unfamiliar. There was a time he used to call me Mama. He hadn't used the word in years. An hour later, Marcus came out. He looked exhausted, but there was something else in his face, relief. I told them everything, he said. The letters, the trust, the way you raised us. He nodded. Thank you. I'm not doing it for you, he said. I'm doing it for Dad. He wouldn't want this. I know. That night, I sat at the piano bench in the living room. I hadn't touched the keys in months, maybe longer. Charles had loved when I played, said it made the house feel alive. I played a single melody, soft, slow, unsure, the same song I'd hummed while rocking Alicia to sleep when she was 10, back before she saw me as an obstacle. Back when love didn't need to be proven with court documents. The trial was 2 weeks away. And now, every word had been spoken, every truth laid bare. Now all that remained was the verdict. 2 weeks passed like fog, silent, thick, and full of ghosts. The trial was set for Monday. That Sunday, I cooked dinner. It wasn't just a meal, it was a ritual. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes with too much butter, green beans with lemon zest, and cornbread Charles had always loved. I set the table for 5, even though only Marcus would come. The others had chosen their side, but that didn't stop the memories from showing up anyway. As I poured sweet tea into 2 tall glasses, I saw Charles at the head of the table, laughing at one of Marcus's high school stories. I saw Alicia scolding Kenneth for double-dipping the gravy spoon. I saw me, younger, a little more tired, but smiling through it all because even chaos felt like love back then. The doorbell rang just as the oven timer went off. Marcus came in holding a box of lemon pie from a local bakery. "Thought I'd bring dessert," he said. "Then I guess you're forgiven for being late," I replied. We ate in near silence for the first 10 minutes, not because there was nothing to say, but because we knew what the next day held. And neither of us wanted to summon it too soon. Marcus broke first. "Do you think Kenneth even believes he's right?" he asked. I set down my fork. "I think Kenneth believes he's owed something, and when people convince themselves of that long enough, they stop caring if it's true." A nodded. "Alicia texted me." "Oh?" "She said if she could undo this whole mess, she would. And yet here we are." Marcus looked at me, eyes sharp in the dim light. "Why haven't you told the court about the updated will?" My hand froze over the tea pitcher. "That's my last card," I said. "You don't play the last card until the hand demands it." He frowned. "But it clearly states everything goes to you. It ends the case." "It ends the lawsuit," I said, "but it ends more than that. You don't come back from something like that. You drop that will in court, and the line between love and war becomes permanent." Marcus leaned back. "You still want reconciliation." "I want understanding," I said, "but not at the cost of truth." The pie was untouched. Neither of us had the appetite. After Marcus left, I stood at the window, watching the streetlight flicker at the end of the drive. It had always been unreliable, that bulb. Charles used to climb up and fix it himself, even in his 70s. I told him to let the city handle it. He said, "If I wait for the city, it'll never get done." That night, I opened the drawer in my study. Inside was the envelope, the updated will, dated 4 months before Charles passed, notarized, witnessed, legally bulletproof. He'd left everything to me, not out of spite, but because he trusted me to do the right thing. He never thought it would be used as a shield. The next morning came with gray skies. Fitting, I thought. Walter picked me up again. Same blue tie, same calm energy. "You good?" he asked as we walked toward the courthouse. "I'm ready," I said. Courtroom B was full. Word had spread. This wasn't just a trial, it was theater. The community wanted to know who the villain was. The gold-digging widow or the greedy children. Everyone had an opinion. No one had the full story. The judge entered. "All rise." We did. Opening statements were brief. Kenneth's attorney tried to paint me as opportunistic, manipulative. My name, my life, was dissected like a case file. Then Walter stood. "This is not a case of fraud," he said. "This is a case of forgotten gratitude. A woman who raised 3 children, supported a loving husband, and built a life from the ground up is now being told none of it was hers. Not because it isn't true, but because her love didn't come with a birth certificate." And then it began. Witness after witness. Property managers confirming I handled every deal. Bankers testifying to accounts in my name alone. Emails, memos. Calendars filled with late-night calls and early morning signings, all from me. I sat silent through it all, composed, until Kenneth was called. He walked to the stand like a man walking into his own reflection, confident but uncertain what he'd see. He spoke calmly at first, how he admired me once, how I'd helped raise him, but then his voice turned hard. "She took over everything," he said. "My dad became less involved, like he didn't have a voice. Ivor." "And did he say that to you?" Walter asked. "No," Kenneth admitted. "But he stopped showing up to family meetings. He deferred everything to her." "Maybe," Walter said, "because he trusted her." Kenneth flinched. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. When he stepped down, I looked at him, not with anger, but with something deeper. Disappointment. The kind that carves lines in your soul more than your face. The judge announced a recess until the next day. Walter and I walked out in silence, but halfway down the steps, I stopped. "He's not done," I said. "No," Walter agreed. "But neither are you." That night, I sat on the porch with the will in my lap, the envelope still sealed. My hands trembled slightly. I could end this tomorrow. But some things deserved to be fought for, not because of what was at stake, but because of what they stood for. This wasn't about money. It was about legacy. And I wasn't ready to surrender it yet. I didn't expect Alicia to show up the next day, but there she was, standing outside the courthouse steps in a beige coat and pearl earrings, clutching a leather folder like it held something more valuable than money. We hadn't spoken face to face in months, not since she stood behind Kenneth during the first hearing, eyes down, mouth tight, like she wanted to disappear. But now, she walked toward me. Slowly, deliberately. "I asked to be called today," she said, skipping a greeting. I raised an eyebrow. "Voluntarily?" "I need to speak. For myself. Not for Kenneth." I scanned her face, looking for signs of insincerity, but there were none. Just exhaustion. Maybe regret. Walter stepped between us. "Is this coordinated with their legal team?" She shook her head. "No, I'm testifying on my own terms. You know it could shift everything," I warned. "I know," she said. "That's the point." Inside, the courtroom felt different, tighter. Like everyone sensed something unexpected was coming. The judge glanced at the updated witness list, adjusted her glasses. "Alicia Parker. You're the daughter of the late Charles Parker?" "Yes, Your Honor." "You may proceed." She stepped up to the witness stand, cleared her throat, and for a second, I saw my little girl again, the one who used to clutch my hand in department stores, afraid of getting lost. Only now, she looked like a woman who'd already been lost for years and was just now finding her voice again. "When this lawsuit began," she said, "I believed we were protecting my father's legacy. I thought maybe Mom had pushed too far, that she was keeping things from us." I didn't move. I barely breathed. But the deeper we went, the more I realized something else. We weren't protecting his memory, we were tarnishing it. There was a ripple in the gallery. Even Kenneth, seated at the opposite table, shifted uneasily. "My mother didn't take anything from us," Alicia continued. "She gave us everything. And I don't mean just material things. I mean nights she stayed up sewing my prom dress when I hated my body. I mean mornings she skipped open houses to take Marcus to speech therapy. I mean the way she sat beside my father every single chemo session, even when it meant missing deals that would have made her richer than any of us can imagine." She paused. "And yes, she built her business, but she never built it to exclude us. We excluded ourselves." The judge leaned forward slightly, listening intently. "My father told me, not long before he passed, that he wished he'd put it all in writing how proud he was of her, how he wanted everything to go to her first, not because we didn't matter, but because she did." Victor Lang stood. "Your Honor, this is emotional testimony." The judge raised a hand. "She's a direct party. Let her finish." Alicia turned to me then. Not just her eyes, her whole body. And the courtroom disappeared. For a moment, it was just us, mother and daughter, hurt and healing in the same breath. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said, voice trembling, "for believing him, for not standing up sooner, for forgetting everything you gave." I swallowed hard. But I didn't cry. Not here. Not yet. When she stepped down, Kenneth wouldn't look at her. The rest of the day passed in a blur of motions and murmurs, but Alicia's words lingered long after the judge adjourned for the evening. Outside, the air was thick with southern humidity, heavy and damp. Walter stood beside me, arms crossed. "She just flipped half the courtroom," he said. "She didn't do it for the court," I replied. "She did it for herself." "That too," he said. "But it helps." Back home, I made tea. The kind Charles used to like, black with a drop of honey and a splash of lemon. I poured 2 cups, set one across from mine at the kitchen table. "I hope you saw that," I whispered. "Your daughter's coming back." The seat remained empty, but my chest felt a little less hollow. Later that night, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Alicia again, this time holding a small wooden box. Her hands shook as she offered it. "This was Dad's," she said. "He used to keep it in his study. I thought it was full of pens, but—" I opened it slowly. Inside were photos, letters, ticket stubs from every anniversary dinner we ever shared, and tucked in the back another will. Dated, notarized, identical to the one in my drawer. "I found it last week," Alicia said. "I didn't tell Kenneth. I didn't want him to twist it. You could have stayed quiet." "I could have," she said. "But then I'd be the coward you raised me not to be." I reached out, touched her hand. For the first time in months, she didn't pull away. "Thank you," I whispered. She nodded, eyes glossy. "Let's end this, Mom. Let's take back what they tried to turn into something ugly." I clutched the box to my chest. We weren't whole yet, not by a long shot. But now, we had a chance. 2 days before the final hearing, I received a letter postmarked from Atlanta. There was no return address, just my name written in thick, sharp letters I recognized immediately. Kenneth. I stared at the envelope for a long time, not because I feared the words inside, but because I wasn't sure I cared anymore. But curiosity, that cursed old ghost, pulled my hand. I opened it. "Lorraine, I imagine you're surprised I wrote instead of calling, but truthfully, I don't think we'd get far if we spoke. Maybe this way, I can get the words out without the temperature rising like it always does between us now. I know you think I'm the villain in all this. Maybe I am. Maybe I lost my way. But I didn't start this fight because of greed. I started it because I never really understood you. You always seemed so composed, strong, unshakable. I never saw you cry when Dad was sick. You never faltered. You just kept everything moving. Schedules, bills, business deals. And for some reason, instead of respecting it, I resented it. I thought it meant you didn't love him the way I did. But now I realize that was your way of loving. You carried the weight no one else could lift. You stood up when the rest of us collapsed. I guess I needed someone to blame. For his death. For our distance. For feeling like the little boy who couldn't measure up. So I blamed you. And I hurt you. The worst part? I think part of me wanted to see if I could break you. Because if I could break you, then maybe you weren't perfect after all. Maybe it wasn't just me who failed. But you didn't break. You stood in court. You faced me. You never raised your voice. You let the truth speak for you. Alicia told me about the second will, the one Dad left in the box. I believe it. And I believe you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm stepping out of the lawsuit, effective immediately. Victor will file the withdrawal papers tomorrow. I won't fight anymore. And if I lose the house, the money, the name, maybe that's fair. Because I've already lost something more valuable. You, Kenneth. I folded the letter, slowly. My hands didn't shake this time. There were no tears, no relief. Just a quiet kind of grief, the kind that settles deep and doesn't scream. Kenneth had finally understood. Too late for innocence. But not too late for truth. I called Walter. "He's withdrawing," I said. Walter didn't ask how I knew. That'll gut their case. We can still proceed to final judgment, or drop everything with prejudice. "No," I said. "We finish. We let the court decide. I need this to be public, not for revenge, for closure." He hesitated. "Understood." That night, I walked the perimeter of the first house I ever flipped, the one I bought with a cashier's check and prayer. The windows had been redone, the roof replaced twice, but the bones were mine. I remembered laying tile in the kitchen on a Sunday night, my knees sore, my fingers blistered. Charles brought me sweet tea, kissed the top of my head and said, "No one's going to see what you went through, but they'll live in it. That's your legacy." He was right. They didn't see the nights, the sweat, the sacrifices, but they tried to steal it anyway. And now, they couldn't. The morning of the final hearing was cool, crisp, the kind of morning that made you believe fall might finally be coming to Georgia. In the courtroom, Kenneth sat in the back row. Not at the defense table, alone. Alicia beside me. Marcus on my other side. Family fractured, yes, but facing the same direction. Walter addressed the court. "We rest, Your Honor. All evidence has been presented. The will has been submitted. The opposing party has withdrawn." Judge Bledsoe nodded. She turned to the gallery, her voice clear and sharp. "Let the record show. Lorraine Parker is the sole legal heir and beneficiary of the Charles Parker estate, per the submitted final will. All previous claims are dismissed. Bang. Gavel down. Just like that. It was over. No cheers. No dramatic gasps. Just the soft hum of breath being released. Like the courtroom had been underwater this whole time and was finally surfacing. I stood, turned to Kenneth. Our eyes met. He gave a slight nod. So did I. We weren't family, not in the way we once were. But maybe, one day, we could be something else. Back home, I lit a candle in Charles's study. Jasmine, his favorite. Then I sat at his desk, opened a fresh journal, and wrote 5 words. He tried to break me. But I built stronger things. The day after the verdict, I walked through the house like I hadn't lived there for 30 years. It felt foreign. Not unfamiliar, but different. Like the way your own name sounds strange when someone says it too many times in a row. The silence was fuller, deeper, as if the house had been holding its breath through the trial and now, finally, was exhaling. I passed by the room that had once belonged to Kenneth. Still neat, almost sterile. He hadn't stayed there since college, but I'd kept it intact: his baseball trophies, a faded photograph from his high school graduation, a poster of a vintage Mustang he never could afford. I reached out and touched the doorknob, but didn't go in. Some doors, even when unlocked, aren't meant to be reopened. Alicia's room was next. She'd offered to clear it years ago, but I told her to wait. I wasn't ready then. Maybe I still wasn't. The bookshelf held all the old paperbacks she devoured as a teenager: romance novels, mystery thrillers, a few historical dramas. A hairbrush still sat on the dresser. I'd once scolded her for leaving it there every morning before school. Now it felt like an artifact. And Marcus's room, smaller than the others, tucked near the back of the hall. It was the only one that had changed over time. He used it as an office when he visited, sometimes sleeping on the pull-out couch if he stayed late. But it still had the smell of printer ink and something else. Grounding. Like cedar and coffee and the kind of loyalty that doesn't speak, but stays. I lingered in the doorway. These rooms were full of ghosts, but they weren't haunting me. They were watching, waiting, as if asking, "Now what?" I didn't know the answer. Later that afternoon, I drove to the cemetery. The sky was overcast, the clouds moving slow, deliberate, like they too were unsure whether to stay or leave. Charles's headstone was simple: Charles E. Parker, 1946, 2023. He lived for his family. I knelt, brushed away a few fallen leaves, and placed a single marigold at the base. Bright, stubborn, impossible to ignore, just like me, he used to say. I won, I whispered. There was no wind, but it felt like the trees leaned in. I didn't win because I fought harder, I continued. I won because I told the truth, because I stood still while they stormed the walls. And when the dust cleared, I was still standing. I paused. But Charles, I'm tired. That was the truth too. Not the bone-deep exhaustion of labor, but the soul weariness that comes from holding yourself together when no one else thinks you're worth keeping whole. I wish you were here, I added, softer now. Not for the fight, but for the afterward. I stayed a while, just watching the skies shift. On the way home, I stopped by the grocery store, not out of necessity but habit. That's what grief does sometimes, makes you cling to routines like they're lifelines. I passed Mrs. Howard near the produce aisle. She glanced at my cart, which held nothing but lemons, bread, and a small box of Earl Grey tea. "You all right, Lorraine?" she asked gently. "I will be," I said, "just finding my new rhythm." She nodded. "You were brave." I was just consistent. That too. At the checkout counter, the teenage clerk didn't recognize me. Good. That meant the gossip hadn't reached the next generation. Maybe that was the real win. Back home, I made tea, sat in Charles's recliner, pulled out the notebook I'd started after the trial. New title: What Remains. I began writing not a memoir, not yet, but moments, fragments, sentences that felt too heavy for conversation but too light to carry alone. When your children stop recognizing your sacrifices, you learn to stop explaining them. The hardest part of aging isn't the wrinkles, it's watching your legacy become someone else's lawsuit. Love and inheritance make terrible dance partners. I wrote until the sun dipped low and the hallway lights turned orange with twilight. The house creaked like it was stretching its limbs after a long sleep. Then, a knock at the door. I opened it to find Marcus. "Didn't expect you," I said. He held up 2 paper bags. "Brought dinner. Ty. God bless you," I said, stepping aside. We sat at the kitchen table, eating quietly for a few minutes. Then he looked up. "I've been thinking," he said, "about how things ended. About Kenneth." He withdrew, I said. That was his olive branch. "But we don't have to pretend that fixes everything." "No," I agreed. "We don't." "I want to help with the business," he said suddenly. "Not as a partner, as a learner. I want to understand what you built, how you built it." I stared at him, chopsticks frozen in midair. "Why now?" "Because I don't want to wake up at 70 and realize I never asked the right questions, never stood in the same rooms, never appreciated what was passed down to me." I set the food down. "All right," I said, "but you're starting with inspections." He smiled. "Deal." Later that night, I looked around the house again. The silence was still there, but now it didn't feel so final. It felt like a beginning. 2 weeks later, I put the Elmhurst property on the market. It was the first house Charles and I ever bought together, not for ourselves, but as a flip, a red brick colonial with faded shutters and a half-dead cherry tree in the front yard. Back then, it was all we could afford. A foreclosure. The backyard fence was collapsing, the kitchen smelled like mildew, and the basement had a crack running across the wall like a wound that never quite healed. But we made it beautiful. I laid the tile in the bathroom with my own hands. Charles rewired the lighting, cursing under his breath every time a breaker blew. We fought in that house. Laughed, kissed in the dusty hallway when the first offer came in above, asking. I kept it all these years not because it was profitable, but because it reminded me of who we were before the business, before the children, before the legacy became a burden. Now, it was time to let go. Marcus came with me that morning for the open house. He wore slacks, a clean button-down, and nervousness like cologne. I smiled as he walked the rooms, checking the brochure, asking questions about square footage and heating systems like a real agent in training. "You okay?" he asked as we stood in the living room, waiting for the first potential buyer. "I'm fine," I said, just trying to figure out how to say goodbye. "To the house? To the version of me who lived in it." He didn't respond, just looked around, eyes tracing the archways like he was imagining a life that never quite belonged to him. The first couple arrived 10 minutes later, young, eager, newly married. They walked through the space with awe, pointing out crown molding and French doors like they were discovering treasure. I listened quietly as the woman whispered, "I can see the baby's crib by that window." Marcus caught my eye. I nodded. They didn't make an offer that day, but it didn't matter. The house would go soon, and when it did, I would let it. Later that week, I was at my office, what was left of it. I'd scaled back the team after Charles passed, kept only a skeleton crew. Mostly old colleagues who didn't want to retire yet, and younger agents I mentored part-time. I sat at my desk going over tax records when I heard a knock. "Walter, thought you were done with me," I said. "I was," he replied, "but I brought something." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a newspaper clipping Georgia Business Weekly, featuring an op-ed titled, "The Quiet Storm, How Lorraine Parker Reclaimed Her Name." I read the first line. She didn't fight with fists or fury, but with facts and a calm that shook a courtroom. He blinked. "It's going to print next week," Walter said. "Figured you should see it first." I leaned back. I never wanted publicity. "Well," he said, "it found you." He hesitated before turning to leave. "And Lorraine?" "Yes? You did good." He left before I could answer. That night, Alicia came over for dinner. For the first time in a long while, she didn't bring tension through the door with her, just wine and a smile that didn't feel forced. We talked about everything except the trial. Books, TV shows, her kids, even Kenneth. Briefly. "He's in therapy," she said, stirring her salad. "Good. He said he might write to you again. Tell him not to rush." She smiled. "You ever think about dating again?" I almost choked on my water. "I'm 63, Alicia, and still sharp as a tack," she said. "Don't act like you couldn't take some poor man's breath away." I've taken enough already." We laughed. It felt real. That night, after she left, I sat in the living room with the lights low. The air was quiet, soft, like the house was exhaling again. I looked around at the photographs on the wall, the one of Charles and me on our 25th anniversary, the kids on Christmas morning, all in flannel pajamas, a shot of the original Parker Properties sign hanging crooked on its first day. Then I took out the framed copy of the court ruling, not to gloat, but to remember. Because memory, I'd learned, was a form of justice, too. You couldn't rewrite history, but you could choose which parts you carried forward. I placed the ruling behind the photo of Charles and me. Out of sight, but not forgotten. Then I poured a glass of wine, sat on the porch, and watched the sun dip below the trees, burning orange and pink and gold like the sky itself was applauding. Not because I won, but because I endured. The following Sunday, I opened my closet and pulled out a pair of navy heels I hadn't worn in years. Not since Charles's retirement party, where he gave a speech about building a life, not just a career. He always loved those shoes, said they made me look like I could walk into any room and own it. And maybe I could. But that morning, I didn't put them on for a business meeting or a courtroom appearance. I was going to church. Not because I suddenly felt holy or needed forgiveness. I'd made peace with God long ago. But something in me, it wasn't regret. Maybe recognition, felt it was time to return to a place where I'd once believed healing could start from the inside. The parking lot was full. I nearly turned back twice. But then I saw Mrs. Whitaker at the door, the woman who used to teach the toddlers class and always smelled like vanilla and Vicks VapoRub. She saw me, and without a word, held the door open. Inside, the sanctuary was bathed in soft light from stained glass windows. The same creaky pews, the same old hymn books. And Pastor Harris, older now, standing at the pulpit with a Bible that looked heavier than it used to. I took a seat near the back. People turned. Some smiled. Some whispered. One or two avoided my eyes altogether. But no one asked me to leave. During the sermon, Pastor Harris spoke about restoration. Not just of property or health or broken relationships, but of dignity. He said, "Sometimes we survive the storm, but we forget to dry ourselves off. We stay wet with shame, thinking survival wasn't enough. But let me tell you this, standing up, walking forward, and not folding, that is grace." I felt something in my chest tighten. It wasn't grief or bitterness. It was recognition. After the service, he greeted me outside. "Lorraine Parker," he said with a warm smile, "you always had a way of coming back exactly when you were supposed to." "I don't know if that's faith," I said, "or just stubbornness." He laughed. "Maybe both." We talked briefly. He asked if I'd be willing to speak at the women's group next month. Something about resilience, he said. I said I'd think about it. On the way home, I stopped by the community garden off Pine Street. It was a project Charles had helped fund years ago. A few raised beds still had plaques with names engraved. His was near the back. I knelt down and pulled a few weeds around his marker. The tomatoes behind it were overripe, one split open in the sundae. "I wore the shoes today," I told him, "the ones you liked." I didn't expect an answer. But the breeze picked up just then, and the leaves rustled in that soft way that makes you feel less alone. Back home, I sat with Marcus at the dining room table. He was learning fast. He had spreadsheets open, loan options highlighted, renovation estimates color-coded. "I think we should convert the lakeside duplex into short-term rentals," he said. "There's a spike in tourism again. Numbers look good. You've been watching the market?" "Every day." I nodded, impressed. He hesitated. "Mom, why'd you never remarry?" It came out of nowhere. But it wasn't offensive, just honest. I took a moment before answering. Because I already had the best partner I could have asked for. Not just in marriage, but in belief. Charles didn't just support what I did, he believed in why I did it. That kind of thing doesn't come around twice. Marcus nodded. "But you're not done living." "No," I said, "I'm not. But I'm not chasing a second act either. I'm just making peace with the first one." Later that night, I took out a box I hadn't opened since the week after Charles died. Inside were old letters. His handwriting. Neat. Thoughtful. One was dated the day after our 30th anniversary. "Lorraine, you always said I was the steady one. The calm, the balance. But here's the truth. I was only steady because you made me feel safe. I was calm because you were the storm that cleared the path. You weren't my partner because I needed help. You were my partner because together we built something neither of us could have built alone. If you're reading this after I'm gone, I hope you remember that. I hope you never let the world convince you that what you gave was less than whole. You were everything, even when they couldn't see it. I folded the letter carefully. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I opened the old record player and played At Last by Etta James, the same song we danced to in our kitchen after closing our 5th property. I danced alone, barefoot, the navy heels tucked away by the door. But in the rhythm, in the melody, I wasn't alone at all. Monday morning, an envelope was waiting in my mailbox. Real stationery, real ink. Not the kind that came from a printer, but the kind someone held in their hands while writing. The return address said Lang and Foster Law Offices. I knew that name. Victor Lang, Kenneth's attorney. I stood there on the porch for a while, the envelope unopened, the sun warming the side of my face. The same sun that had risen every day during the trial, indifferent to the weight of justice or betrayal. Eventually I opened it. Mrs. Parker, I hope this note finds you in a season of peace. I've been practicing law for 25 years, and in all that time, I've never written to an opposing party after a case concluded. But there's something about your story I can't shake. Not the legal aspects we both know the court reached the right decision, but the human part, the part that reminds me why I became a lawyer in the first place, not to win arguments, but to protect truth. When Kenneth first retained me, I saw a man unraveling, not from greed, as I once assumed, but from the weight of unspoken fears. I don't excuse what he did. But I understand it now, in ways I didn't then. I watched you hold the room with silence more powerful than any outburst. I watched you choose restraint over revenge. I watched you win with dignity. And I thought, maybe that's what justice should look like. If ever you publish your story, I'd be honored to read it. With respect, Victor Lang. I folded the letter slowly and slid it into the drawer beside Charles's reading chair. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt affirmed. There's a difference. Vindication means someone told the world you were right. Affirmation means you never needed them to. That afternoon, Marcus and I walked a new property, an old craftsman-style house in the historic district. White columns, slate roof, original oak floors covered in dust but still solid. This place has bones, he said, crouching to inspect a cracked tile near the fireplace. Everything worth saving does, I replied. He stood. It's been on the market forever. No one wants to touch it. Then it's ours. He grinned. Just like that? Just like that. Oh. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the living room bathed in amber light. I didn't know if it would go in a listing, a scrapbook, or maybe a future book, but I wanted to remember what potential looked like when no one else could see it. As we were leaving, a young woman knocked on the front door. "Hi," she said nervously. "I saw the sign. Is this your property?" "Soon," I said. "Are you looking to buy?" She smiled, hesitant. "Actually, I was hoping to rent. I'm a teacher. Just moved here. Budget's tight, but I fell in love with the porch." I looked at Marcus. He gave a small nod. I turned back to her. "You teach what?" "English, high school." "You remind me of someone," I said. "Is that a good thing?" I smiled. "The best." She didn't know it, but she just met the woman I used to be. And I wasn't about to turn her away. "Leave your number," I said. "We'll talk." She scribbled it down. Grateful. Hopeful. As she walked away, Marcus nudged me. "You just gave up 3 months of potential income." "I gave someone a place to begin," I said. That night I started writing again. Only this time I wasn't writing about what happened. I was writing about what could. Note: a memoir. Emmanuel. Title: Inheritance Isn't Just Money. Chapter 1. Build Something Worth Fighting Over. I wrote until midnight, until the pen felt like an extension of my hand, until the silence of the house became companion instead of burden. Then I stood, stretched, and turned off the lights. In the dark, I whispered to Charles, or maybe to myself, "It's not over. It's just the part where we start again." 3 weeks after the verdict, I got a call from the county probate office. "Mrs. Parker, the woman said. "We've finalized the deed transfer on the old vineyard plot. Your husband's name has been removed. It's solely yours now." "Thank you," I said, though the words felt strange in my mouth. I hung up the phone and stared out the window at the lot behind my house, the wide, sloping field Charles had always dreamed of turning into a vineyard. He used to joke that when we were old and gray, we'd sip our own wine on the porch, arguing about who came up with the label. We never did plant those grapes. Not because we didn't have time, but because there was always something more urgent. School recitals, leaky roofs, market dips, mortgage rates, cancer. Now the land was mine alone. And instead of planting grapes, I was planting the closing chapter of a legacy I never asked to defend. That weekend, I asked Marcus to help me clean out the attic. It was time, and if I didn't do it now, I knew the day would come when someone else would have to do it for me. We carried down boxes, years of memories packed in cardboard, each one with its own gravity. Alicia came over too. She brought coffee, wore gloves, and didn't flinch when she found her old journals. "I forgot I ever wrote these," she said, flipping through one. "God, I was dramatic." "You were 16, I replied. "It was practically your job." We found a box labeled Charles Misk. Inside were old report cards, coaching whistles, faded photos of his students, and at the bottom, a sealed envelope with my name written in his familiar slanted print. I opened it with care. "Lorraine, if you're reading this, then you've outlasted me. That was always the plan. You were always stronger. I know we never planted that vineyard, but maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was having something to dream about, even if we never got to live it. Dreams don't have to become reality to be worth having. But if you do decide to plant those grapes one day, name the first bottle after something we believed in. Like forgiveness." I folded the letter and tucked it into my pocket. Outside, Marcus was hauling old furniture to the curb. Alicia stood beside a pile of yearbooks and baby clothes, holding up a small wooden box. "Mom," she said, "do you want this?" It was the memory box I'd made when we finalized our first major property deal. Inside were tiny scraps of life, our first business card, a napkin from the diner where Charles and I signed our first offer, a miniature tape measure, photos of our construction crew from 1998. "I think it belongs to all of us," I said. She smiled, placing it carefully in the keep pile. Later that night, the three of us sat on the back porch. The stars were out, the kind of sky that made you feel small but not insignificant. "I've been thinking," Alicia said, nursing her tea, "about the vineyard." Marcus looked up. "You want to sell it?" "No," she said. "I want to do something with it." "What?" I asked, surprised. "Something for the community," she continued. "A garden, an education space, a place where kids can learn things they don't teach in school anymore, like real estate, home ownership, financial literacy." Marcus leaned forward. "That's actually brilliant." I stared at them both. For a moment, they weren't the children who broke my heart. They were the ones building something in its place. "I still own it," I said, smiling. "But maybe I can lease it to someone I trust." "Like family?" Alicia asked softly. "Like visionaries," I corrected. Marcus chuckled. "I'll take that." In the quiet that followed, I felt something shift. Not a grand moment, not some sweeping cinematic ending. Just a click. Like a lock finally turning after years of being rusted shut. We stayed out late, talking about ideas and budgets and even naming the place. Alicia suggested the Second Harvest. Marcus said it sounded like a food bank. I said it sounded like redemption. We wrote it down anyway. When I went to bed that night, I didn't toss or turn. I didn't reach for Charles's pillow or look toward the empty half of the bed. I just slept. Like a woman who had finally put down the last weight she'd been carrying. It took 3 months of zoning meetings, permit applications, and phone calls with the city, but on the first Saturday of spring, we broke ground on the vineyard lot. Or rather, the Second Harvest. That's what the wooden sign said, freshly installed on the edge of the gravel drive. The Second Harvest, a Parker family initiative. The letters were hand-painted by Alicia's youngest, with a little help from Marcus. The paint was still tacky in spots, but no one cared. It looked perfect in its imperfection, honest, like everything we'd survived. The space wasn't large, maybe half an acre, but we had plans. raised beds for seasonal crops, a greenhouse on the west side. A small structure that would serve as both a classroom and event space. Marcus was already designing solar panels for the roof. We weren't growing grapes, we were growing knowledge. It was Charles's dream, twisted slightly by time and shaped by the hands he left behind. That morning, volunteers showed up, former clients, old neighbors, a few teenagers from Alicia's school. Even Pastor Harris came, sleeves rolled up, offering to help with shoveling. "I thought you were more of a pulpit man," I teased. He grinned. Jesus was a carpenter, not a desk jockey. The first seed we planted wasn't a vegetable or flower. It was a folded note, written by Alicia, placed into the dirt beneath the cornerstone. A tradition we made up on the spot. She handed me a copy. "This is for every woman who was told she was too strong, too loud, too much. For every mother who held it together while the world tried to tear her apart. For every second chance earned, not given." I pressed it to my chest. Sometimes, legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we plant in people. Midday, Kenneth arrived. He came quietly, without warning. No entourage, no suit. Just jeans, boots, and a humble expression. He stood at the edge of the lot for a while, unsure. Then he walked over, shovel in hand. No one said anything. Not right away. Alicia saw him first. Her posture stiffened. Marcus followed her gaze. I waited. He stepped in front of me and cleared his throat. "I don't want to interrupt." "You're not," I said evenly. "I brought some wildflower seeds," he added, holding out a small envelope. "Figured they'd go well along the fence line." There was a time I would have told him to take his symbolic gestures and plant them somewhere else. But that time had passed. I nodded. "Over there," I said, pointing, "by the east gate." He nodded back and got to work. I watched him for a while, not as a son who betrayed me, not as a man who tried to take what I'd built, but as someone trying to rebuild himself. And isn't that what this place was about? Forgiveness wasn't forgetting. It was deciding to stop holding your pain like a sword. By sunset, the plot was tilled, the beds framed, the first round of compost spread. Everyone gathered near the front sign for a photo. I stood in the center, Alicia on my left, Marcus on my right. Kenneth lingered at the edge, but Alicia pulled him in. "Family," she said simply. We posed, smiled, click. When the crowd cleared, and only we remained, I looked at the plot of land and felt proud. Not of surviving, of growing. "Next week," Marcus said, "I'll bring in the students for their first class." "On what?" I asked. He smiled. "Legacy." Alicia laughed. "You mean budgets, right?" "Same thing." We stood there in the soft hush of early evening, the air warm with promise, the soil rich with possibility. Charles would have loved it. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. That night, I wrote the last sentence in my notebook. The inheritance wasn't the land, or the money, or the name. It was the courage to begin again. 3 months after we broke ground, I sat on my front porch at dusk, the same way I had for nearly 40 years, coffee in hand, radio playing something soft and old. But this evening, everything felt different. Not because the world had changed, because I had. Across the street, kids rode bikes with streamers fluttering from their handlebars. One of them waved, and I waved back. A year ago, they wouldn't have known my name. Now, they called me Miss. Lorraine and their parents brought me zucchini and tomatoes from their gardens, trying to return the kindness we'd planted on the old vineyard lot. The second harvest had grown faster than any of us expected. What began as a symbolic project turned into a living, breathing space. People came not just to garden, but to learn, to share, to rest. Veterans with quiet eyes, teenagers who didn't know where else to go, widows like me who needed to be seen again. And every Sunday, Charles's old rocker sat at the edge of the porch, facing the road. Empty, but never lonely. Kenneth came by once a week now. He helped build a tool shed on the lot, brought coffee and stories I hadn't heard since he was a boy. We didn't talk about the lawsuit. We didn't have to. Some wounds don't need reopening, they just need sunlight. Marcus took over half the property business. He still asked questions, but now they came from a place of curiosity, not doubt. He was good at it, better than I'd expected. He even started calling the business Parker and Son in documents, though we both knew the heart of it would always be Parker and Wife. Alicia organized a series of women's workshops in the community space: financial literacy, home ownership, power from paper, she called it. She let me speak at the first one, and for the first time I told my story not as a victim, but as a witness to my own resilience. Justice, I said, isn't always a gavel. Sometimes it's just getting to keep what you already earned. People nodded. Some cried. Afterward, a woman pulled me aside. I thought I was the only one, she whispered. You're never the only one, I told her. You just haven't found your people yet. That evening, Marcus brought over dinner: lasagna, salad, sweet tea. Alicia joined with the kids, who raced through the hallway like the house had finally remembered how to hold joy. We ate on the porch, laughed, told stories. As the stars came out, one of the twins, Emma, crawled onto my lap and pointed at the porch light. Grandpa used to leave that on for you, she said sleepily. I kissed her forehead. He did. Why? So I'd always find my way home. She smiled, content with the answer, and drifted off to sleep. The porch light glowed above us, steady and soft. After everyone left and the dishes were washed, I sat alone with my thoughts. Not regrets, not grief, just peace. I picked up my pen and opened the journal one last time. Epilogue. They tried to take my name, my dignity, my work, but they couldn't take my story, because I lived it. Every blistered hand, every slammed door, every silence I held instead of shouting, I carried it with grace. I didn't fight for the past. I fought for the right to move forward. And I did. So if you're reading this, leave the porch light on. Someone might be trying to find their way home.